Vice President of Industry Leadership and Strategic Initiatives for the college. And it's a great pleasure to have you all here with us. Our partners in Menus of Change, the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, Department of Nutrition. This is a joint initiative, and it's focused on accelerating innovation around the business of healthy, sustainable, delicious food choices. Dr. Walter Willett is chair of the Department of Nutrition at Harvard, who has worked with us over many, many years on this summit and a number of other programs, and I want to thank him at the outset, although he's still in transit. So, but he assures me he'll be here on time for his great collaboration over the years, and also to a number of other members of his team. Dr. Eric Rim is with us for their collaboration as well. We've been working against, I think, a very powerful yet simple insight over the years, which is that informing and fostering change around food choices is one of the most transformative actions that we can take to promote global health and sustainability. Going back perhaps 12, 13 years ago, we launched a program called Worlds of Healthy Flavors, which is largely focused on the multi-unit chain sector. And as probably Dr. Willett will mention in his remarks, that collaboration was very early on in bringing the issue of trans fat to the industry, and I think accelerating the rate at which we were able to move trans fat out. And of course, we saw the FDA ruling just recently on that in terms of a pretty quick transition on that issue in the larger scheme of public health initiatives. This is another program that we've run over the years, now I believe in our 10th year, with Dr. David Eisenberg, also from the Harvard School of Public Health, who is with us today. This program is focused on not chefs per se, but really on educating the leadership of the healthcare sector, physicians, hospital administrators, and others. We typically have about 400 physicians and healthcare leaders with us each year in the Napa Valley. And then that brings us to Menus of Change. How many of you were with us in one of the first 2 years when we did this in Cambridge, Massachusetts? Terrific. So welcome back to all of you. We're going to continue the conversation for those of you that are new, arriving just this year. We've really conceived of Menus of Change as a look at the future of our industry, at the future of food and the future of food choices. You know, so much of our lives is focused on the immediate quarter, on the immediate year, and this is an opportunity to take a longer view and see how a lot of this adds up, and not just in 3 to 5 years, but out 10, 20, and 30 years. And as a result, how might the business of food need to change to be successful? In terms of the way we've envisioned the initiative, we've said simply, can we envision future menus and food choices that help reverse obesity and chronic disease trends, lighten the impact on our environment, and still yield delicious flavors that delight our customers? Much debate over time in terms of trade-offs there. Clearly, we're not going to be able to make trade-offs if we're going to be successful going forward. We have to figure out a way to integrate these things. There we go. So one of the ways that we approached this was by starting to sort of disaggregate our concerns and the issues, because oftentimes you talk to people and everything's conflated. It's all one tangled sort of bowl of noodles of issues and concerns. So we said, let's first figure out what is optimal from a nutrition and public health perspective, and let's put that in one circle. What is optimal from an environmental sustainability standpoint, and put that in one circle. What about social responsibility and ethics? What are those concerns that we can tie to an evidence base? And then what is our best, most optimal situation in terms of culinary insight and cultural appeal? So then what we said is, all right, let's integrate all of those into the top circle. So now we have a vision of healthy, sustainable, delicious food. The question is, can we deliver that in a restaurant setting? Can we deliver that in a variety of restaurant settings, variety of food service settings? And that's where you get the bottom circle of business models and strategies, which you then have to bring those two together to get something that we're calling the future of food integrated guidance for business and culinary leaders. And one of the things that I want to mention at the outset that we've tried to do is think of this a little bit as a GPS exercise. All of you are in different positions in the industry. It's difficult for us to know what you need. So what we've tried to lay out is what's optimal from an evidence perspective. And then you're going to pick up and respond to what you need to, what you want to, what's going to move your business forward. But we're trying to help provide some integrated guidance and vision for the industry in terms of where we see these issues developing. Which leads us to our 2015 annual report, which we're issuing in conjunction with this conference, which our first general session will talk about in a few minutes. And one of the, a little sticky here, a couple of the sort of background perspectives, if you will, that has informed our work. And I think this is something that we heard very clearly over the last 10 years. You know, it's interesting, someone should write a book on how our industry has managed these issues over the last 20 years. And we all recognize that phase where, you know, it was clear there was interest in public health, but for the longest time it was sort of, if you have a special interest, a special need, we're going to treat you as a special case, maybe a medical need. But we're going to continue to do what we do. And that really changed with you know, the Atkins craze and a number of other early initiatives. And there was a reaction of the industry, I think, to try to move this forward. And of course, then we had a separation between what people said they wanted to do and what they actually were willing to pay for. But along the way, as we've, I think, risen to the challenge increasingly as an industry, there's been this sense of trying to deal with one-off issues. Trans fat, perfect example. Then it's sodium. And probably many of you have been to meetings where it's about one issue. It's about sodium, or it's about you know, refined carbohydrates, or GMOs, or local sourcing. And there's this long laundry list of issues, some larger, some smaller, that are all collectively important. But the question is, how do you add that all together? And what is the vision of 5 years out, 10 years out, where these trends and issues either intersect or start to diverge? And this is not to mention the small matter of how we're going to feed a planet of 9 to 10 billion people in the run-up to 2050 with declining water and land resources and a variety of climate impacts. Now, you could say, oh, well, 2050 is a long ways away. Actually, it's only 35 years away, but clearly there's going to be a path between here and there that are going to increasingly impact the situation of how we manage our food resources and our natural resources in the world. And two perspectives. One, we're seeing this in the headlines now. I'm based out in California. You all understand the drought. We'll have conversations about water in this conference. And I also think about our own graduates who are graduating this year, and you mentioned something like 2050. They're still at the peak of their career in 2050. So our students are going to be very much dealing with more and more of these issues as time goes on within the context of their professional career. I show this slide just because at the end of the day, from our perspective, it all comes back to taste. And you know, this is a slide that I'm quite fond of because it's this notion of, I'll just read it, the unapologetic elevation of deliciousness as a global health and sustainability imperative. I've participated in many public health meetings over the years, National Academy of Sciences, all kinds of conferences. And you know, I sometimes look at my watch in terms of how long before someone mentions the word taste or deliciousness or flavor, and it's like, okay, that was a half an hour. You know, another times it's 2 hours. And then oftentimes it's a sense of, well, of course it has to taste good. But making food taste good is not a simple thing, as everybody in this room knows, especially when you start to apply some constraints to it. So I think that from my perspective, one of the big opportunities, you know, people talk about bridging different communities, breaking down silos, but we still have a lot of work to do to get everybody to agree and have a sense of what deliciousness means. And in both in terms of what drives that, but also the fact when you mention something in terms of public health, there's a sense of a larger public good, right? We're not just talking about a few high-end restaurants here. And I would argue, really looking across the globe, that even if you have families that have $1 a day or less, as long as they're even a little bit above subsistence, people everywhere care about how they eat. They care about what they do with their food when they go to the market. And so this is something that is not an elitist phenomena. It's something that we have to care about at many, many different levels. And then, speaking of global, the reason I added that there, and for those of you that have participated with us in the past with CI programs know this, sometimes I think the conversation about how we're going to move forward on these issues is overly narrow. And it's interesting to look beyond our own borders, particularly at a time when we're so open to new flavors, to see what kind of inspiration we can find when we go abroad. And so for 17 years, we've been running out of our California campus a program called Worlds of Healthy Flavors, which many of you may have attended, which we've tried to bring together the gold standards of these cuisines. And of course, we're really just focused on flavor for that conference, but coincidentally, if you look at a lot of those cuisines, Mediterranean cuisines, Latin, Asian cuisines, many of them are plant-based, and many of them have traditions of celebration when the lamb is killed and put on a spit, or some other festival or feast. But what's amazing is that over centuries, these cultures have developed really fabulous everyday food, and we can learn a lot from that. So I think we need to widen the lens as we seek to explore how we're going to bring all these constraints together in a way that is delicious and keeps our customers coming back to our restaurants. And I mentioned world cuisines and cultures, but I really should frame this up within a larger context about thought leadership here at the CIA. A few years ago, sort of in the middle of doing all the leadership work that we've done, we sort of sat down and said, what are we really trying to do, and how best should we organize our thinking about that? And we created 4 platforms, if you will. Professional excellence and innovation obviously goes to the core of what we are here at the CI and have been for our entire history since 1946. But innovation, as we'll hear from Will Rosenzweig in a little bit, is something that is continually reinvented itself, our whole notion of innovation. I mean, think about how you think about innovation today versus that word as it was used maybe 10 or 15 years ago. Health and wellness, a big reason that we're here, world cuisines I just mentioned, and sustainability and food ethics. But these really thread together in some very fundamental ways that I think you see some opportunities, some synergies that you don't necessarily get if we look at these things separately. So with that, it's now my great pleasure to welcome to the stage the president of the Culinary Institute of America, Dr. Tim Ryan.
Hello, everybody. I have a couple jobs today. First is to welcome you all to the Culinary Institute of America, to our main campus here in Hyde Park, New York. Some of you, I know, have been here many times. Many people have never been here. Some folks have been here, but not in the past couple years. And so if you fall into that category, this is a brand new facility. And we have lots of other changes on the campus. So during the course of menus of change, we hope you'll get out and about and enjoy what we think is a wonderful campus. So welcome to the Culinary Institute of America. Welcome to Menus of Change. As Greg said, this is the 3rd time we have undertaken this conference, which is really part of a larger initiative. We don't view Menus of Change as just a conference we do once a year, but a much broader initiative that we're trying to measure to make a positive impact on the eating habits of Americans in particular. And I think we are doing well. When we started to think about Menus of Change several years ago and collaborate with our partners at Harvard on this, we were basically looking at a couple things. This is just to set the context of the entire conference, because sometimes, at conferences or in particular sessions, we'll do deep dives, and you can start to lose the forest for the trees. So we were really looking at a couple issues. One was health and wellness. CIA is not new to that topic. We've tried to exert leadership for many, many years, for decades, in fact, in that, but it's becoming increasingly important to America and to the food service industry. Then we have all these issues of the environment and sustainability. And I believe that we were amongst the first to say these two topics are interlocked. They're definitely related. And as we can move one, we can make a positive impact on the other. There's another set of related issues that we referred to as food ethics. So when we talk about GMOs or humane treatment of animals or a whole host of other things, we kind of categorize those as food ethics. And we looked at those as emerging, rapidly facing the food service industry, worthy of attention and innovation. And that's what Menus of Change was. But there was one other priority that we had, and that we wanted Menus of Change to be about doing. Both Harvard and the CIA are institutions that are about making change, and particularly the CIA. This is literally, though we're an institution of higher education, we're a college. It's built on a foundation of chefs, and it still has a chef's kind of culture here, and chefs make stuff. They do stuff. They're not content with just talking about things and analyzing things. And so we wanted Menus of Change to be representative of that. And we wanted it to go beyond the normal kind of preaching and sharing that happens at so many conferences, but we wanted to have it focus on business opportunity. Business opportunity versus legislation. Now, there's many times in our lives when legislation is important and necessary and the right solution. But America, it turns out, maybe you'll agree with me, is much better at capitalism than we are at prohibition. It's ironic on one hand, it's preposterous on the other to think that we're contemplating in different parts of the country right now banning sodas and legalizing marijuana. How do you reconcile those two? Discuss amongst yourselves during the conference. But our idea was that if we could point the way for the food service industry in particular, for entrepreneurs, for businesses, to make money, that fundamentally they're agnostic as to whether they sell carrot sticks or French fries. We have to help them to innovate and to do what's going to help us save the environment, to be healthier, to live longer, to make a positive impact. And so that's what we're trying to do. You'll hear and see many examples. And this is not a you flip the switch and you're done kind of proposition, right? It's going to take time, but I think we're making progress. And during the time that you're here experiencing Menus of Change, you'll hear lots of folks who are trying stuff out and learning from that and making progress and hopefully making money. We think they're making money too. So many of them are connected to the CIA. They're either alumni or alumni are deeply involved in those organizations. And it's to try to provide some benchmarks, some sources of inspiration that we can all follow as to how to do this and how to make this really happen in a fundamentally optimistic way. You'll also hear about initiatives just here at the CIA. We can't just preach, we have to practice what we preach. So you'll hear about our new food business school. Will Rosenzweig will talk about that and how this initiative is directly related to Menus of Change. You'll hear about our not yet even opened new dining facility here on campus, which is nicknamed the Egg, and tomorrow you'll get to see that, and how we're trying to revolutionize student dining here at the CIA. And even today, when we break, we're going to expose you to some experiments on burgers. You know, unbelievably popular in America. Everybody is launching burger concepts. And we did some cutting-edge research and development a year or two ago with University of California at Davis, with the simple idea that if we just started to displace ground meat with vegetables, and we started with mushrooms, what would happen, and how would consumers start to react? Well, it turns out we started to displace up to 50% or more of meat with mushrooms with extraordinary results. So what other ingredients could we start to use, and how might that help people consume more vegetables and be even more profitable? So you'll get to actually try, rather than just hear about and read about. You'll get to try them and see if you like them or not, whether you'd be interested in buying them. So those are some of the things that we're going to do at Menus of Change. Also at Menus of Change, we issue a kind of report card. It's an annual report, and we have two councils. You'll hear from the leadership of both of those councils as to how we're doing and what kind of progress we're making. So I encourage you to read. This is the executive summary, and then there's a larger report which we can provide you in hardbound copies, or you can access that online. And they're extraordinary. I will say that we come to Menus of Change to learn more, and I actually differ with our two expert panels. I think I do, at least. You know, I haven't heard from them and really what all their scientific rationale is, but I think that they were a little bit pessimistic this year, because they show us taking a step back in many areas. And once I hear the science, once they share the data, I may agree with that, but kind of from my perspective, I see all kinds of positive changes happening, that we truly are making progress. If you're concerned about soda consumption's down. Water consumption is way up. We may have a problem with water supply in the future, which is an issue we have to be concerned about. But if you just look at those two dynamics, it's encouraging. Potato consumption is down. Beef consumption is down. Chicken consumption is up. Vegetable and fruit consumption is up. Sodium is flat to declining, and on and on. The obesity rates are flat to declining. Childhood obesity rates are flat to declining. Type 2 diabetes is flat to declining. So we're making some moves, but what I really am excited about is maybe anecdotal and not totally data-driven, is that if we look at all the high-end restaurants and look at all the high-end chefs in America and see what they're focused on, and if we believe, as I do, that there's a phenomenon known as trickle-down, that it's those folks that set the pace for the rest of the industry, and then everybody else to fast food follows suit. There is a vegetable, a whole grain revolution that is underway right now that's extraordinary. And it is exciting in that it really makes some great promises for the future. So I think we're doing better than the report shows, but we have to defer to the experts and let them tell us why they rated things like they did. So all that said, we're really excited to have Menus of Change on the Hyde Park campus for the first time. We're excited to have you here. And I'm going to get off the stage so we can get on with the rest of the conference. Nice to have you here. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Dr. Ryan. Now, before we get started, I want to just make a few thank yous. Get my clicker here. On the back of your program book, if you turn over your program book, you'll see our sponsors for this year's Menus of Change conference. We're very grateful to these folks, many of whom are among the most innovative in our industry. And we very much look forward to, I think, an important part of change is to the extent that folks can be collaborating and all rowing in the same direction, we're going to get there a lot faster. our distinguished roster of presenters who have generously given their time to be with us for this conference. We're very grateful to you, and obviously all the chefs and operators in the room, our colleagues in the media, participating students, and CI students and faculty who will come and go throughout the program. We appreciate you joining us, and we appreciate all that you're doing to advance these issues. In the report, you'll see a list of our two councils. We have a Menus of Change Scientific and Technical Advisory Council that's chaired by Dr. Walter Willett from Harvard, who will be joining us shortly. And this is a distinguished group of scientists and technical experts from across the United States, from a variety of institutions, according to their areas of technical expertise. And then I just went a little bit too fast. And then we also have a Sustainable Business Leadership Council that Arlin Wasserman of Changing Taste, who I'll introduce in a minute, chairs. And our idea here is that we want to have the folks that are actually out making change in the marketplace, having success, participate in helping to shape how we can bring these messages, once we have an understanding of what the evidence is, how we can bring those to a broader audience, and what are the kinds of concerns, the kinds of issues that we should be bringing back to our scientists for their input on. I want to come back a little bit to the annual report. There we go. And just talk about a couple of things to have you think about at the outset of the conference. And this is I mentioned before the notion of a GPS, and this is our model for change. I'm not going to go into great detail about this, but this gets into the whole notion again that I mentioned before of disaggregating some of these concerns before we kind of roll them back up. So I encourage you to spend some time with this diagram. But briefly, what we're trying to do is to look at on the left side, the way in which the public health and environmental issues roll up together and provide input to that first middle square, which is the current business strategies and menus. But then you have some other things that are feeding into that as well: values, ethics, and consumer preferences, which may or may not be evidence-based. It may simply be driven by personal philosophy, but they're your customer, you have to deal with that. Cost and economic trends, a lot of nice-to-haves that we may not be able to afford. You start to bring those together, and then you go through a risk and opportunity analysis. Now, later in the conference, we're going to have a series of sessions on risk analysis and looking at some of these big issues coming up, and then you have to make a judgment in terms of how quickly those are going to hit. Things like water resources, for instance. Is that something I need to pay attention to, or is it going to rain next year in California and it'll be business as usual? Then, as a next step, you have the opportunity to think about how the culinary insight and the business insight comes together, and at that point, you then have an opportunity to, I think one of the most interesting things about this model for change, which maybe this model would have been constructed very differently a few years ago, because it was all very much responding to the consumer, and there was perhaps a sense that we couldn't lead the consumer. But I think now we have plenty of evidence that we can lead the consumer in terms of shaping consumer preferences, and that feeds back into itself. But eventually you get over to the right and you get successful change. So I encourage you to spend some time with that. And then coming back to the principles, we're going to talk a little bit during the conference about some infographics that we developed. This is an infographic on the 24 principles, which we hope will be more useful than the graphic that we had shared with you last year. So I encourage you to spend some time with that. But I want to talk just for a minute, and Arlin will talk more tomorrow about impact. We spent a lot of time building a foundation of evidence for this initiative, and now we want to make sure that we're accelerating our impact and supporting our partners in driving change. Several years ago, we developed our Healthy Menus R&D Collaborative, which is an outgrowth of our Worlds of Healthy Flavors initiative, which is a group of 30 or 40 chain and multi-unit chefs that get together to work on specific issues under this umbrella. and very much appreciate. I just want to give a shout out to Deanne Brandstetter and Pam Smith. Deanne Brandstetter of the Compass Group, Pam Smith of Shaping America's Plate, and Tom Gumble of Panera, who are the co-chairs of that initiative, and we're excited to see the success that they've had, and they'll be talking more about that during the conference. The Compass Group, who is partnering with us on our new initiatives here on campus with respect to food service. They've been a big supporter of this conference over the last 3 years. We got a phone call a few months back saying we're signing on to the Menus of Change initiatives, and we're going to associate metrics to those over the course of 3 years and really drive some actionable change on several of those key principles, which we're thrilled about. A couple of other initiatives that I want to just briefly mention. We've had a partnership in place with Google for some time. Michael Backer, who is the Global Director of Food for Google, will be with us tomorrow afternoon speaking. We're developing a culinary innovation and world flavors lab that is a CIA-Google partnership at the Mountain View headquarters, opening later this year. That will be a place where we can take the various principles from Menus of Change, operationalize them, test them in an environment of 50, 60, 70,000 employees worldwide, and see what we can learn from that. And we have also developed a Menus of Change University Research Collaborative that is co-led by the CIA and Stanford University, which is focused primarily, as you might suspect, on the university sector. And the vision for that initiative is I'll just read this quickly: to create a dynamic invitational network of leading university-based scholars, business leaders, and executive chefs to collaborate on research and education in support of culinary-centric, evidence-based food system innovation within and beyond universities. This group, we know there's a lot of innovation going on in colleges and universities around the country. We think that this will help to accelerate that, to better network that innovation, and to better draw together the academic research that's going on with all of the work on the food service side that is equally important. Just a quick shout out to Shirley Everett at Stanford, who's the Senior Associate Vice Provost, Eric Montel, who's the Executive Director of Stanford Dining, and Christopher Gardner, who's Professor of Medicine there at Stanford, for their leadership with that collaborative. And the Executive Committee of the collaborative met yesterday during the collaborative, just before the conference, and many of them are here with us throughout the conference. So with that, this is a list of the members. We have actually about 25 academic members of various college universities across the country that have signed on to this and are very excited to work with us to move these things forward. All right, so that brings us to our first general session, and I'm very excited to be looking and seeing Dr. Willett, who's here, who's had, I think, a Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, if you remember that movie, day, but he's joining us. So I will first, we're going to be jointly led by Dr. Willett and Arlin Wasserman. So let me just introduce Arlin first. Arlin is a principal and founder of Changing Tastes, a consultancy that finds value and opportunity at the intersection of 5 drivers of change in our food system: sustainability, public health, information technology, demographics, and the changing role of the culinary professional. Arlin is a fellow at the Center for Leadership and Global Sustainability at Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University. He was previously a Kellogg Foundation Fellow, an Aspen Institute Fellow, and he's the chair of the Sustainable Business Leadership Council for Menus of Change. Previously, he was Vice President of Sustainability and Corporate Responsibility for Sodexo. And Dr. Willett, I think is known to all of us, hopefully in the room, is Professor of Epidemiology and Nutrition and Chairman of the Department of Nutrition at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health and Professor of Medicine at Harvard Medical School. He has published over 1,500 articles, primarily on lifestyle risk for heart disease and cancer. He's written the textbook Nutritional Epidemiology. He has 4 books for the general public Eat, Drink, and Be Healthy, the Harvard Medical School Guide to Healthy Eating, which has appeared on most bestseller lists. Eat, Drink, and Weigh Less, co-authored with Molly Katzen, The Fertility Diet, and most recently Thin Fluence, co-authored with Melissa Wood and Dan Childs. He is the most cited nutritionist internationally and is among the 5 most cited persons in all fields of clinical science. He is a member of the Institute of Medicine and the National Academy of Sciences and the recipient of many national and international awards for his research. Please welcome Dr. Willett and Arlin Wasserman.
Going to rest a little bit after your trip? Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. As Greg talked about, Menus as Change is about the business of healthy, sustainable, and delicious food. And also with this conference and the report which I and Dr. Willett are going to talk about, providing the business case, the models, and the strategies to succeed at delivering healthy, sustainable, and delicious food, and also to help you succeed in driving innovation and change within your operations, within your companies, and within your dining halls to help achieve a better future of food and to provide, again, that integrated guidance for business and culinary leaders. Before I get into this year's report, I just want to recognize and thank those of you who have been a part of the first 2 years of Menus of Change, including the members of the Scientific, Technical, and Advisory Council and the Sustainable Business Leadership Council, as well as the many of you who have come to the first 2 leadership summits held at Cambridge or otherwise participated in the initiative. Because in the 3 years that we have done this, we have already achieved some rather unique accomplishments in how we put change on the menu and the agenda for our profession. When we think about how to pull together sustainability and public health and business, as President Ryan suggested. We've taken on that challenge and succeeded in the first year by actually saying that changing menus matters and putting healthy and sustainable and delicious on the menu, not just in the supply chain or in the nutrition department, but literally changing the menus and the recipes about what we serve is a powerful lever for change and one our profession needs to attend to. And now it is pretty commonplace to know that focusing on changing menus is the way we make a contribution to health, quality of life, quality of the planet, and also quality of our business. In recent months and years, we've also started to think protein first. And while for many years we've talked a lot about carbs and fats, thinking about the nutrition, the cost, and the environmental impacts of protein choices as a place to emphasize has also been a contribution that started here within the Menus of Change initiative. And then last year, we started to talk about the water footprint of foods, not just the water footprint of food, but that different types of ingredients take different amounts of water to produce. And there again, we brought forward a new idea. So I want to thank everyone in this room who's been a part of the last 3 years of helping to put a particular kind of change on the menu and on the agenda, and that is one where culinary professionals, we're chefs, where what we choose to serve, what we choose to cook for our diners is the main way we drive health, environmental, and business success. This year, with the Menu of Change report, we wanted to highlight a few things. First, again, as Dr. Ryan talked about, each year for the past 3 years, we've provided a performance dashboard that shows how we're doing as a culinary profession and an industry in serving diners in the U.S. This is also, President Ryan, a classic instance where it is not only recipe design, but menu design that matters, because as you look at the menu, the items at the bottom, especially around innovation and investment standards, and the influence chefs are having are the ones where we have done really exceptionally well this year. Dr. Willett and I will talk about a few of the highlights of this dashboard later on in the presentation. But what the dashboard indicates is those areas where in the past year we've had anywhere from significant decline, going backwards too fast, to standing still to making good progress. And the way we develop the dashboard is a unique partnership between scientific and business leaders. Members of our Scientific and Technical Advisory Councils are some of the nation's leading experts, in particular in disciplines of environmental science, nutritional epidemiology, food systems, economics, agricultural economics, as well as business economics. And we ask each of them to propose an evaluation of how the industry has done in the last year on one of the issues where the culinary professional in the operation and the choices they make about what to put on the menu can drive change. That recommendation is then discussed among those in the other profession so that we can provide both an evaluation and also guidance that is integrated. We don't get the confusing guidance such as eat more fish, but the world's oceans are overfished. And instead, what should we as chefs and food service companies do? Those recommendations are then brought to the Business Council, and we have a joint meeting where we talk about whether or not the scientific experts, based on data in one or more disciplines, matches up with what we're seeing on top and bottom lines in the industry. And that's how we develop each year's performance guidance. This year, again, was a year after several years of very good progress in dietary intake, which Walter will talk about. We held steady, but we made tremendous improvements in the business side. And we'll get into that in a bit. As Greg mentioned, the two councils also have worked to put together a set of 24 principles, half on operations, half on menu design. So, almost a baker dozen of each, that you can use to apply comprehensively to drive improvement in any one of these areas. Our hope, as Compass Group did, is that many of you will choose and take some of these indicators back to your companies or your operations and say, these are the metrics by which we will start to measure the success of our own businesses and operations. We also wanted to provide an executive briefing on some of the issues that matter. And we wanted to look overall at the year of change. And this certainly has been a year when menus changed, and so did the fundamentals of the food service industry, in some ways that are very appealing to the diners and also in ways that are challenging to businesses. First and foremost, this year's IT ingredients in fine dining and already trickling down are decidedly sustainable, as chefs help us try and figure out how to eat more of each plant and animal and address food waste by cooking everything and wasting nothing, and also looking at how to bring in a greater diversity of species, including plants that may need less water to grow, fish and seafood species that we throw away instead of eat in the past. And also last year's IT ingredients, or maybe last decade's IT ingredients of kale and Brussels sprouts are now quite mainstream, even showing up on test menus at restaurant chains like McDonald's. And we're also continuing the successful trend of opening restaurants that think plants first. And the bowl that includes whole grains and plants is the base for a meal, and fast casual is now becoming almost ubiquitous everywhere in the country. We also provide executive briefings on the key issues that we use to evaluate performance of the culinary profession and food service industry. For instance, I mentioned fish, seafood, and oceans. And if you want to take this to your teams, to your leadership, to your organizations, and say, we know there's this issue about eating more fish, and we know there's this issue about overfishing. What do we need to know? What's the business case for change? What are specific recommendations that we can take in-house? These briefings provide those insights. I want to provide just a couple of headlines from those briefings for you. One on, again, a year of change. One of the ways this has been a significant year of change is around climate change and water, which we'll talk about throughout the conference. But these have weighed rather heavily on the bottom line, showing up as unexpected food costs and food cost volatility. We've had another year of record droughts, record temperatures, and record CO2 levels. And what's unique about this is not only that this can be addressed through menuing a more plant-forward approach that we'll talk about, which helps us with food costs, but that same change actually can help reduce the carbon emissions and water intensity or water use in providing meals to diners. It's also been a year of change around supply chain transparency. And supply chain transparency, or knowing where our food came from, how it was produced, who produced it, has become an increasingly important issue for diners in recent years. But this was the year that it also became an increasingly important business practice, because knowing that where our food comes from, who grew it, or who caught it, and how it was caught is a key business process for addressing things like labor problems in the world's fisheries, getting at the issue of GMO labeling, and also what we may have to address in future years as new scientific findings emerge. And while there's been no new science to speak of on whether or not eating GMOs is bad for our health, there is an emerging body of science, including statements from the World Health Organization, that growing GMOs in the way that we do hurts our health and the environment. And then also the issue of animal welfare and supply chain transparency. I think many of us are experiencing the issue of egg cost, egg shortages, and bird flu. When we started writing this year's report, the issue was porcine endemic diarrhea virus and pork prices and pork shortages. So some operations say we don't know what's going on, there's a surprise around the corner, while others say we know where our food comes from, we know how it's grown, we know how the chickens and pigs and eggs are raised, and we're confident in our supply. A year of change when something that diners cared about has now become a lever to drive greater business success. And the largest restaurant companies are also now making pledges to use clean ingredients. In a short while, we'll hear about one of the most far-reaching ones from Ron Shake at Panera. Also, in all of this, it's very clear that the health and environmental imperatives are converging. And those foods that have the largest environmental footprints are also those that pose some of the greatest risks to our health. With some research coming out of the Harvard School of Public Health that Walter will talk about, we found that the environmental impact and the health impacts of different kinds of foods are closely related. And with that, I want to welcome Walter to tell us a little bit about how health and environment are coming together.
Thank you, Arlin. It's a real pleasure to be here. I've not been to this campus before. It's of course beautiful, and this new auditorium is particularly a great place to be getting together. So, thank everyone. I'd like to thank everyone who helped make this possible. I was almost a casualty today from the obesity epidemic. As Greg mentioned, I just barely got here. I was on a plane, and our plane was overweight, and my seat was the last one assigned, so I had to get off the plane. So, which is this one has not happened to me before, so interesting. I'm going to give a quick overview of some of the most important things that have been developments during the past year with regard to our diets and health. Probably the biggest single event was the publication of the 2015 U.S. Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee report. And one of our faculty members, Frank Koo, many of you know him, was on the committee there, and he put together this summary of about 450 pages of detailed documentation supporting the final recommendations of this report. I think, as most of you know, this is a report based on a systematic review of the scientific literature. The final guidelines will be released hopefully by the end of the year by the departments of HHS and Department of Agriculture, hopefully reflecting as true as possible the scientific conclusions and recommendations from this committee. But there's some interesting issues that I'll come back to where it's not quite clear what the report will actually say in the end. I've highlighted in bold here the topics that I'll talk about in this few minutes that are of particular importance, and throughout the next couple of days you'll be hearing more about some of the other topics. The first I've highlighted here in bold is to remove restriction on total fat, and that's really a big deal. This is something we've been pushing for the last 20 years or so, and I think many of you are aware that menus in schools and other institutions in all government programs have been pushed toward high carbohydrate intakes because of a restriction on total fat for sometimes individual foods, sometimes for the whole diets. And that really had no scientific basis ever, and lots of evidence has built up that there's no health advantage to low-fat diets per se, but what is really important is the type of the fat in the diet, and that's becoming more and more important as years go by, and we see the type of fat being important for many diseases beyond just cardiovascular disease, where our studies focused first of all. There was still a retention of 10% of upper limit on saturated fat, and I'll come back and talk about that in a little more detail. There was a removal of the restriction on dietary cholesterol and thereby eggs in moderation were said to be okay. And that caused a lot of confusion. And I'll circle back and describe a little bit more the bigger picture and how that recommendation fits in. Very importantly, and it's really the focus of this conference, for the first time, the advisory committee emphasized the importance of considering environment as well as health in making dietary choices. And that is where a storm has developed, because in the final year's end budgetary appropriations bill, Congress inserted a clause saying that the government should not make recommendations about environmental impacts of diet, which is pretty strange because the USDA is charged with considering food security. And how can you have food security if you don't have a sustainable food system and sustainable diets? That's just incompatible. So the committee came out strong. USDA is under tremendous pressure, particularly from the meat industry, to not say anything about the environmental impacts of red meat. But in some sense, it's good that there's discussion and debate about this, because that puts it much more in the public view. And hopefully the USDA will support the conclusions of the committee and also issue a strong statement about environmental impacts of dietary choices and food systems. And then the report also set a 10% of calories upper limit on added sugars. And the strongest evidence, the biggest part of this, actually relates to sugar-sweetened beverages, which are a huge part of that of the total sugar intake in our country. And I'll say a little bit more about that. I'm not going to go into all the evidence in that 450-page document. We'd be here a few weeks rather than a couple of days if we did that. But just to point out that this evidence was based on a very thorough review of the literature, what we call a systematic review, and in most cases there were meta-analyses. Most of them had already been published that summarized the literature statistically. Just for an example here, this is looking at sugar-sweetened beverage consumption and weight gains. These are from randomized trials in adults, and as you can see, every single study that looked at this issue saw greater increases in weight with higher sugar-sweetened beverage consumption. That dark vertical line is would be no effect or no association. All the studies were to the right of that line, and the overall result was highly statistically significant. Similar findings were shown in children with randomized trials, and then there's a bigger body of data based on long-term prospective observational studies as well. So there's just layers and layers of evidence here supporting the conclusion of the report. Now, weight gain and obesity are very important, but even more important are the disease consequences of sugar-sweetened beverages. And as you can see, this is a meta-analysis looking at sugar-sweetened beverage consumption and type 2 diabetes risk. In all but one tiny little study is to the right of that solid vertical line, showing increases in risk of type 2 diabetes with higher sugar-sweetened beverage consumption. And overall, as you can see at the bottom, there was a 1.26 relative risk, meaning a 26% increase in risk of type 2 diabetes for each serving of sugar-sweetened beverage per day. And the problem is, in many groups in the United States, the average is about 3 servings a day, and 10% of the country is somewhere around 5 or 6 servings a day. So you multiply that 26% times 5 or 6, and you're at huge increased risk of type 2 diabetes. But even 26% increase is an important increase in risk that would best be avoided. Now, this is where we clearly need a lot of creativity, and already there has been a lot of creativity in alternatives to sugar-sweetened beverages. Our department produced this chart a few years ago, looking at the number of teaspoons per serving of sugar-sweetened beverage to emphasize that the huge amounts, 17, 20 teaspoons of sugar in a standard 12-ounce serving of many sugar-sweetened beverages, but also 100% fruit juices as well. And at the bottom in the green, of course, we have water, tea, coffee that are very healthy. But we thought that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. So we did create this yellow category of not more than 1 gram per ounce of sugar in the beverage. And that opens up a lot of opportunities. Well, you can have a little gentle sweetness. Not everything has to be sugar-free, especially if someone is not seriously dealing with overweight or obesity. And we are starting to see a lot of new products in that yellow area, and there's room for a lot more, as well as more green options as well. The conclusions of the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, again, focused on red meat as being particularly important both for health and the environment. And again, that's based on a large body of literature. Just as a couple examples here, looking at risk of type 2 diabetes, both for unprocessed red meat and processed red meat, very consistent literature, and overall highly significant increase in risk of type 2 diabetes with increasing consumption of red meat in the diet. We've done some additional analyses in the last couple of years looking at swaps. Basically, instead of having red meat, having a nut as a protein, nut dish as a protein source, or low-fat dairy, or whole grain, or poultry, or fish. And as you can see, all of those bars are to the left of 1.0, meaning that there's a lower risk. So, for example, nuts, there's about a 20% lower risk of type 2 diabetes for each serving per day of nuts replacing red meat. Of course, your diet doesn't have to be all nuts or all fish or all low-fat dairy, and kind of putting together a variety of these foods, every one of which is a lower risk than type 2 than red meat. Putting that combination together will have a substantial impact if we swap out red meat for these healthier alternatives. And as you can imagine, there are thousands of different ways you can put together healthy alternatives to red meat. And we are seeing a lot more creativity on menus now with those options. And again, there's room for a lot more. This is a similar analysis looking at swapping alternative protein sources for red meat in relation to risk of coronary heart disease. And it doesn't matter what you replace red meat with, whether it's poultry, fish, nuts, beans, they're all associated with lower risk of heart disease compared to red meat. And for total mortality, also, we see, not surprisingly, since heart disease is the #1 cause of death in the United States and almost every country now, with higher red meat consumption, increasing risks of overall mortality. That's unprocessed red meat and processed red meat, both for men and women, and this has been confirmed in other large studies within the United States as well. So the evidence, again, for each of these conclusions is very strong based on large studies of many types. I think one of the new findings here was a report we published last year, toward the end of last year, where for the first time we're able to look at diets during high school years in relation to risk of cancer and other outcomes into the future. And it's pretty interesting looking at breast cancer, which is the most common cancer in sort of younger women in middle age. We are seeing stronger relationships between what these women were eating in high school and their breast cancer risk than between what they were eating in midlife and their risk of breast cancer. So we know from lots of other lines of evidence, breast tissue is particularly vulnerable during childhood and before first pregnancy. And here we see about a 40% increased risk of breast cancer for women eating the most red meat during their high school years. So those of you who are involved in food services in schools, colleges, this is particularly important. What we're serving our customers, our audience then, is very important. I'm going to talk about saturated fat and eggs a little bit because of the confusion that we've had. And I think it's helpful to start with this view of the U.S. plate. This doesn't exactly look like a plate. It's a pie chart, and we hope your plate is not a pie. But this is essentially a breakdown of the source of calories in the United States using the national survey data from the NHANES survey. And what's, I think, most important to realize is that 50% of the calories in the United States come from carbohydrates. So those are the red sections on the left. And then if you further subdivide those carbohydrates, about 75–80% are refined starches, added sugar, and potatoes. all high glycemic, unhealthy sources of calories, and just a little sliver comes from whole grains and other carbohydrates like from vegetables, which in general are not very high in carbohydrate except for potatoes. So about 40% of the overall calories are coming from unhealthy sources of carbohydrate. And then there's a slice for saturated fat, monounsaturated fat. Mostly dairy products and meat are providing those sources, and then little bits of polysaturated, and then of course the protein section, which is about 15% of the total plate. So the point here is, if you are, and when we look at one dietary factor in nutrition, if it's a sizable part of the calories, we always need to think about what other part of the diet we're comparing it to, because we don't just either subtract or add saturated fat. Consciously or unconsciously, we're swapping it out for other sources of calories for the most part. And so the issue, if we're talking about saturated fat, we always need to think about what we're comparing it with. And if you don't specify any comparisons, just by default, you're comparing it mostly with unhealthy sources of carbohydrate. And that's a principle that's really important to understand. So a lot of the confusion about saturated fat was caused by a meta-analysis, a big study that was supposedly comprehensive, published just a little bit over a year ago, in which they concluded that saturated fat was not related to heart disease and the type of fat was not important at all, which is contrary to a vast amount of other literature and other studies. And there are many problems with that analysis. They just made error after error, but the conceptually biggest problem was that in their data, where they just pulled numbers from studies, they really couldn't specify the comparison source of calories when they were looking at saturated fat. So by default, it was mostly these unhealthy forms of carbohydrate. And the point here is, if you compare saturated fat in the middle with trans fat, actually saturated fat looks good. Trans fat's so bad that by comparison, saturated fat is better. But overall, saturated fat is about, in terms of relation with heart disease, about equal to carbohydrates overall. But then, as I've just mentioned, the type of carbohydrate also makes a difference. So if you replace saturated fat with refined starch and sugar, the vast majority of calories in the U.S. diet, actually that could be a little bit worse than saturated fat. But if you replace saturated fat with whole grains, then actually that will be an improvement. But most importantly, if you replace saturated fat with unsaturated vegetable fats, liquid vegetable oils that are high in monounsaturated fats or high in polyunsaturated fats, this includes canola oil, soybean oil, olive oil, virtually all the liquid vegetable oils fall into this category. That leads to a reduction in risk of heart disease. And that's been the recommendation for quite a long time. And the evidence is still overwhelming. And really, I think, certain here that replacement of saturated fat with these unsaturated vegetable oils will reduce heart disease risk. So that's basically the source of a lot of confusion, and it's why there is still a limit on saturated fat. And the guidelines report really focuses on the type of fat, but replacing saturated fat with these healthier forms of fat, and of course, getting trans fat off the table. And of course, that was really the big news today. I'm sure you all heard that officially USDA did say they were implementing the ban on partial hydrogenation of vegetable oils, and that will be enforceable by 2018. And that's a celebration. We've been working on this for 35 years, and finally this is we're seeing this enacted, and I think a very important step forward, even though we've already eliminated the large majority of trans fat from the diet. But we've got so many other things to deal with. It's good to be at a point where we can just forget about trans fat and focus on the other big issues. The issue around eggs was similar to saturated fat. It really depends on what you're comparing eggs to. And it's sort of another way of looking at this is there's a spectrum of health effects of any food, of foods. They could be really very harmful at one end of the spectrum or very beneficial at the other end of the spectrum. Eggs sort of fall in the middle. So they're about, you could say they're neutral. But if you're really trying to have an optimal breakfast, you don't want just neutral. You want something that improves your health, not just is neutral. So again, it's what you're comparing eggs to. If you're comparing eggs to bagel, jam, 100% fruit juice for breakfast, that's a really unhealthy breakfast. That's full of high glycemic carbohydrates, essentially no healthy fats. There's a little bit of nutrition in the fruit juice, but basically that's not a healthy breakfast. Eggs and toast compared to shredded wheat and milk, probably about neutral. But if you really want an optimal breakfast, it would be something like steel-cut oats, nuts, and blueberries. That will actually reduce your blood cholesterol, and we've shown for each of these, there's positive, so for each of those elements, whole grains, nuts, and blueberries, positive benefits for coronary heart disease and diabetes. So again, I think this principle of considering the comparison is going to be very important. So Arlin, I'll pass this back to you.
Walter, would you like to stay on stage with Joe for a couple minutes? Thank you, Walter. I think what we'd like to do now is just share a few highlights from the performance dashboard that Walter and the Science Council he chairs developed and was reviewed and informed by the Business Council. Two of the areas where performance in the minds of both councils was challenging was around climate change and water. We're going to be talking about this on Friday, and one of our plenary speakers, Will Sarney, said, frankly, if climate change is the elephant or the lion in the middle of the room or the shark in the middle of the room, he has lots of animal analogies, then water is its teeth. And so the issue of unpredictable weather and then limited water resources come together. And here, our evaluation was that in climate, we're not getting better. Emissions continue to rise, and agriculture both contributes to that, especially from livestock production, and also is affected by it. And it's really that latter piece where we're not doing well enough, which is to think, how do we as an industry manage to adapt our menus and our purchasing practices to avoid the impacts of climate change or the surprises on our business? And similarly with water, while there's lots of mention of red meat being a major driver of water, also even developing measures and having industry standards and awareness around how we can help conserve water in agriculture or in those areas that are experiencing depleting groundwater resources, those aren't commonplace practices. I was struck, Walter, by also something you said about the pressure on the Dietary Guidelines Committee. And I know that last year's plenary speaker, Carrie Hammerschlag, who I believe is with us, has been working hard to get comment in and also public awareness of the need for comprehensive approach to diet, including sustainability and climate change. Just wanted to make that recognition as something that started at our conference last year. The other comment I wanted to make was around protein consumption and production. And here again, it is chefs leading the way, and there's lots of great innovation happening with red meat production consumption in the United States continuing to decline, although it's growing in developing worlds. But climate conditions are reducing supplies, driving up price volatility, so are diseases, and they're underscoring the business case for either further reductions or new practices. And again, it's how our industry protects itself from the cost volatility that comes from how we raise animals now that has caused that score to be so low. In both instances, chefs and food service operators can play a key role in leading and inspiring the dietary shifts and the business shifts. Walter, would you like to talk a little about some of the dietary trends?
Sure. Thanks, Arlin. I'm going to talk about three particular areas here that are circled. One is the trends in diet over the last 12 years. As you can see, we've given this a sort of neutral position of the thumb there. As I'll show in a minute, we've actually seen improvement in diet quality, but we tempered that a little. That was tempered a little bit in our conclusions by some of the things going on in Congress. I'm sure we can all find some things we'd rather have turned out differently, but it was troublesome that there was an effort by, it just happened to be senators from Idaho and Montana and Maine that got potatoes recognized as a vegetable for the WIC program, as well as now school lunches. And they really don't behave like a vegetable in terms of their health effects, and that really undermined the effort of a lot of people, including the USDA's effort to improve the quality of the WIC program and school lunch standards as well. And the second point, just a quick word on serving size. One of the new events has been essentially, since we met last time, the implementation of the national rule on menu labeling, but the compromise was that it's only for calories. And that, I think, there's discussion about, I think in general that's still good, but it's not balanced by an appropriate emphasis on quality as well. The quality of calories actually is a major determinant of the calories that we eat over a day. And that's why we sort of had a neutral position for the thumb on that indicator. And then on fruit and vegetable consumption, we are making some progress there, even if we don't count potatoes as a vegetable. So I'll go on and talk a little bit about the time trends. This is something we plan on doing on a regular basis now. In our first Menus of Change meeting, for those of you who were there, you'll remember we provided our first analysis of time trends on diet quality in the United States. It had occurred to me a few years ago, in fact, when we were planning the Menus of Change conference, that we have no regular monitoring of diet quality in the United States, and that seemed to be a pretty huge deficiency. I don't know how that was really overlooked. Maybe you could be a little skeptical and think there might be some reason it was overlooked, but in fact there was no monitoring on overall diet quality. So we decided to use our alternative healthy eating index as the metric, the measure of diet quality. And we had first produced this in year 2000 as an alternative to the USDA Healthy Eating Index because their Healthy Eating Index in our large long-term studies did not predict health outcomes at all. You were no better off in the long run if you adhered to the Healthy Eating Index or if you did not adhere to the Healthy Eating Index. So we came up with an alternative index that emphasized not just total fat, but the type of fat, that emphasized the form of carbohydrate, not just total carbohydrate, and emphasized the source of protein, not just total protein in the diet. And I think you'll understand that there's good reasons for all of those. And some other indicators, fruits and vegetables, and we didn't count fruit juice, et cetera. I won't go into all the details on the Healthy Eating Index scores, but I'll come back to them in a minute. And in our large analysis, we did see that if you had a higher score, meaning you were 4 or 5 on your rating of your whole diet for the alternative healthy eating index, there was a substantial reduction in major chronic disease risk, and that included cancer, heart disease, and total mortality, and especially major benefit for cardiovascular disease. So that's how we scored diet quality. And then we used the NHANES data, the National Survey of Nutrition Data in the United States. It's been going on for quite a few years now. It is the best available monitoring of what people eat, and applied our alternative healthy eating index to score everyone's diet. And we published, what I showed last time and we published a few months ago was the score through 2010, and just within the last several months, the CDC has released updated data through 2012. There's always a couple of years lag there because of the processing of this huge amount of data. And the good news is, as you can see, there's been a steady improvement in diet quality. And the score went from about 40 to about 50 since year 2000. And I think that's really wonderful. I wasn't even sure which direction this was going to go when we started this project, but I know many people in this room, probably almost everyone in this room, has been working on trying to improve diet quality, and we can see it paying off. It is improving, and this means fewer heart attacks, fewer deaths, healthier people, basically. So this improvement is real. But keep in mind, we're up to about 50. That score can go up to 110. So there's huge room for major improvement still. So we can't slow down our efforts, but we can see that they are paying off. And then when we look at the individual scores that go into this measure of diet quality, by far the biggest change at the top is trans fat. And a higher score means less trans fat, obviously. And not surprisingly, we're hitting a ceiling on trans fat now. So to keep up the rate of overall improvement, we've got to do more work on things other than trans fat, because we're not going to improve our trans fat score further at this point in time. There were some other important improvements, and that purple line in the middle is an increasing score for sugar-sweetened beverages, meaning a decline, an important decline in sugar-sweetened beverages. And I think we are really at a tipping point in the cultural acceptability of sugar-sweetened beverages at this point in time. I suspect many of you live in places like our community where it would be a little bit unacceptable to be having an event and putting sugar-sweetened beverages, full sugar beverages out as an option. We've also seen at the bottom, some small but steady increase in whole grains, a little bit of improvement in fruit consumption as well, but sodium intake has actually been drifting in the wrong way. And I suspect that's because people are eating out more where the sodium intake is higher. So even though some places have worked hard at reducing the sodium content of their food, overall, we as a population are going in the wrong direction there. We need a lot of effort in that area. But from a public health standpoint, the troubling aspect of our analysis is the stratification by socioeconomic status. And I think this is no surprise to anyone, because income gaps are increasing. Almost every kind of socioeconomic indicator shows increasing disparities in the United States, and we see that directly translated into what people are eating. So the top line there, higher income and education, we're doing great. These are people that are shopping at Wegmans and Whole Foods and places like that, and eating at the restaurants and food services you're providing, I'm sure. But unfortunately, at the bottom, low income, low education groups have really not improved much at all. So this is going to take extra effort, and I think we can't forget, even though we can celebrate our overall improvement, that we need to do everything we can to bring everybody along. And just to wind up, I do want to emphasize again the point that Arlin made, this convergence of health impact and sustainability, and particularly when we're looking at major protein sources. As we've shown, the red meat is an outlier in terms of adverse health impact. We didn't talk much about dairy, but it's sort of neutral in terms of health impact, but also has a very large footprint in terms of greenhouse gas production. And we will come back here more about climate change. This, having looked at some of the recent analyses and projections, is something I worry about tremendously when I think of the world my grandchildren are going to be living in. It's quite frightening. So everything we can do to shift our diets, our menus down toward lower greenhouse gas production, and then our partners in the agricultural part of the food system will need to be working at, for everything that they're producing, how to produce it in a carbon neutral way. This has to be one of our most important societal goals over the coming decades. Thank you.
Thanks, Walter. I just want to take a minute or two more to not bury the lead in the areas where I thought that things had been going tremendously well were around innovations, startups who are hoping to disrupt the food and food service industry and deliver many of the benefits that you talked about, and we all are here to help contribute to, are attracting incredible investment, not just headlines, but recently up to $500 million in venture and private equity investment in new plant-forward and sustainable agriculture and food concepts. And also the change in investment standards, where the professional investors, the publicly traded companies, are now very formally looking at sustainability programs as an indicator that a company will perform well. And when some of those startups begin to move from small stage to going public, that they're some of the best performing stocks that we have, because the investors see the value of healthy and sustainable dining concepts and link that to long-term stock performance. When our councils looked at how the year had gone, we also said, what is it that will help those of you who join us at the conference, culinary professionals, to become better change makers and entrepreneurs? So this afternoon, over the next 2 days, we're going to be looking more at plant-forward concepts, at how we can shape consumers' choices through design, like designing our dashboard so the good news might be at the top instead of the bottom, and also how to cook up the news and help shape the media's agenda. We'll also, as we've talked about a few times, help provide you with the business case for making change in risky areas, and look at issues such as water, food cost, food production, food volatility, antibiotic use in food production, and also the relationship between the food we eat, our health status, healthcare costs, and the economy in which our businesses operate. So we have a wonderful 2 days ahead to help us all be better change makers and contribute to the performance of our industry, our planet, and our health. And with that, I'll welcome Greg back to the stage.
Thank you, Walter and Arlin. And I think that last focus on innovation and investment is a great transition, a great setup for our next speaker. A little shift here from the challenges to the opportunities. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome Will Rosenzweig. Will is the Dean and Executive Director of the Food Business School at the Culinary Institute of America. Will has spent his career as an educator, social entrepreneur, and venture investor. Will was the founding CEO of the Republic of Tea, the company that created the premium tea category in the United States. As an entrepreneur and investor, he helped grow Odwalla, Leapfrog, Stonyfield Farms, Hambrick Vineyards and Wineries, winetasting.com, and Brand New Brands, which was a functional food incubator he founded in 2004. Will co-founded Physic Ventures, the first venture capital firm supporting early-stage companies in health and sustainability, including Revolution Foods, Pharmaca, Recycle Bank, and Yumly. Will is the co-author of The Republic of Tea, How an Idea Became a Business, named one of the top 100 business books of all time. He is a longtime faculty member at the Haas School of Business at the University of California, Berkeley, where he developed the country's first MBA coursework in social entrepreneurship and social venture development. Please welcome Will Rosenzweig.
Is this on? Can you hear me? Thank you. Thanks, Greg. It's really weird to hear stuff your mom writes for those bios, but it is touching and it's nice to feel loved. But you know, entrepreneurs and investors, they look out on the horizon in the future and forward, looking at signals. The data that scientists look at are trailing and trend lines in the past or the present. So it's very interesting. Arlin and Greg asked me when we started working on Menus of Change to join the Leadership Council and to lead up the Finance and Innovation Committee. So it's been a great pleasure to be involved in watching this initiative grow from its inception. And about 2 years ago, speaking with Dr. Ryan and Provost Mark Erickson, they were showing me some new data that was coming in, looking at the interests and intentions of recent CIA graduates. And they said, you know, a growing preponderance of CIA grads want to start their own business or want to go into business and also even pursue non-traditional sort of culinary careers. They want to apply their culinary training perhaps in new kinds of businesses, food and tech, maybe agriculture. I thought, well, that's an interesting signal. I've seen a similar signal at UC Berkeley, where the number of students in the business school and even in the School of Public Health has grown dramatically over the last decade toward, you know, I was actually speaking with the dean of the School of Public Health at UC Berkeley recently about food, and he said, yeah, a third of our students in the School of Public Health are interested in food. That was unheard of just a few years ago. So just rising interest in people wanting to kind of intersect with the food system. And we started thinking about all of these dynamic transitions that your businesses are facing. And then at the same time, as a venture capital investor, I'm getting this signal that deal flow in early stage food companies is just going through the roof, something I have not seen in 25 years. The number of millennials, the number of people from the tech sector, the number of companies that have just been formed in the last 3 or 4 years, and the amount of investment capital is unprecedented. So with those data points, we started thinking about what are the challenges? How is the food business different than any other business? What are the unique qualities of it that are not being addressed in traditional business school? And how is the Culinary Institute of America positioned to deliver on that unmet need. And that began a dialogue that we started, and Mark equipped me and a little team on the West Coast. He said, you guys go out and be the pirates on the West Coast, and you see what you can do to start up a food business school. So that was about a year ago. And now, in February, we announced the Food Business School, developing entrepreneurial leaders to transform the business of food. The Food Business School is the new center for executive and graduate education at the Culinary Institute of America. And just this month, we've launched our first courses. They're called Innovation Intensives. And we're running one this week called Food Experience Design. 2 weeks ago, we ran one called Scaling Up Your Authentic Food Business. And next week, we're running one called Concept to Shelf. And our mission is really to develop the ethical leaders who are prepared to work in this incredibly sort of unprecedented dynamic environment, a systems environment, to address the challenges of health, sustainability, and food, and everything that goes with it. And I think what's fascinating is the technological innovation vectors around the mapping of the microbiome, for instance, or cloud-based mobile data or sensor data that's being applied in both in the field in agriculture and in the body with fitness tracking. Right now, the USDA has My Plate, supposed to apply to 275 million people. Once we get the microbiome mapped, we may have My Plate for one person. This is going to be completely transformative to the way people see food. So the Food Business School is setting out to really birth new ventures in food and tech, in packaged food and supply chain, and in restaurant and food service. We're serving millennial graduates, we're serving growth entrepreneurs who are already in business, and we're serving corporate entrepreneurs of big companies. We've got 3 types of programs. On Local, which are online courses that have a local in-person component. We have Innovation Intensives, which are in person. We've been running them at the Greystone campus in St. Helena. These take on an important business challenge. They serve as sort of a strategic planning retreat where people evaluate their options in teams and then develop a playbook when they come out. And then we're developing a food venture lab, which we're going to experiment with for the first time in the fall in the Bay Area, in conjunction with UC Berkeley, UC Davis, and Stanford. We're going to have students from Food Business School and those 3 universities together building new companies over 15 weeks. At the end of 15 weeks, the people will pitch real live investors for capital. Now, a lot of this was inspired by my own experience teaching entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship at UC Berkeley. And 8 years ago, I had 2 amazing students named Kirsten and Kristen. And Kirsten was here last year from Revolution Foods. And the business plan for Revolution Foods was birthed in my social entrepreneurship class. And now I see these 2 women sort of just going around the country and the world, inspiring dozens and dozens of other new entrepreneurs, and many, many women entrepreneurs. And I just find this challenge and opportunity to be incredibly exciting. So we've got a program. We've launched something called a Smart Brief. I just wanted to encourage you all to go to our website at foodbusinessschool.org, sign up for our Smart Brief. This is one of the kind of quickest and most efficient ways you can get information at the intersection of food innovation, entrepreneurship, and investment. And we want you to join us. This is a little bit of a video that is on our website that tells the story or invites participation. Hope you enjoy it.
Food connects us all. Food is a $7 trillion business, and the responsibility is massive. Feeding the entire world. Today, our food system is in peril. We are facing challenges as diverse as undernourishment, overnourishment, population growth, and climate change. Where some see crisis, others see opportunity. We need innovative leaders who think differently about food and our food system. Leaders who can transform the food industry to focus on people's health as much as profits. Entrepreneurs who can create food businesses that bring innovative solutions to entrenched problems. Innovators who have a deep understanding of the entire food system and a hunger to make a difference. The Culinary Institute of America introduces the world's first business school dedicated to food entrepreneurship and innovation. Are you ready to change the world through food? Join us.
Thanks. So our intention over the next few years is to be your go-to resource for the talent you need in your businesses to continue to lead. And on my way to New York on Sunday morning, funniest thing, I'm sitting there at SFO, I'm looking at my cell phone. I get 3 emails almost in a row saying, "Did you see this?" Can you see it? This is Ron Shaich's letter to America. Did you see it? It was in the New York Times. Yeah, so that's pretty neat. 3 people on a Sunday morning reading the paper, and they want to send it to me. Why is that? And they had no idea. I wrote back, yeah, what an honor. I get to introduce Ron on Wednesday afternoon at the Menus of Change conference. So what a great coincidence. But, Ron Shaich's a serial entrepreneur. Well, I guess he's a bred entrepreneur. So this is a person who sees signals and knows how to act on them. And he's also identified not only the market signals, but he's understood the consumer and the operational signals in a way that has translated into enormous competitive advantage. And if you've read his letter, which is quite moving, he talks about how personal this is for him. And I'm just really grateful that we have the opportunity to have him kick off this conference and also to put the spotlight on the role of innovation and entrepreneurship. And as a founder and a CEO and a chairman, he's got all those titles, but I think you'll come to see that he's really also the Chief Innovation Officer. And he's been able to turn risks that are actually crippling other companies and creating market depreciation in their stock value into competitive advantage for his own business and heightened trust with his customers and associates. So it's really a great pleasure to have Ron Shaich here. Please give him a big round of applause and a warm welcome.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Rick. I don't know about you guys, but I think the only reason he said those nice things is I used to be a customer. Okay? That's really the truth. Okay, let's start, and let's see if we can just give you some sense of Panera today. That's what grounds it. So if we talk about Panera today, what are we talking about? We're talking about nearly 2,000 bakery cafes across America. We're talking about bakery cafes that span 45 states and run into Canada. What else are we talking about? 10 million customers a week. 1 out of 30 Americans, I like to say, but 10 million customers a week. What else are we talking about? 80,000 team members, 80,000 employees, and somewhere in the range of about $4.5 billion in sales. Give you some sense of that company today. It's probably one of the 10 largest food service companies in the country. Something else about Panera? Its stock performance. It's led the industry in the last 15 years. If you look at it, our stock has been up 4,000%. That's happened at a time that the S&P 500 has essentially been up 40%. And you can see the other players, the other leading players in the industry and where they stand relative to us. A little bit more about Panera if we can. Let's talk about why Panera succeeded, because it's the roots of what I want to talk about today. It starts with where we've been for the last 20 years, where we're trying to get to in the next 20 years. Let me begin and say this. Panera has a history of making a difference in the lives of its guests. That's really what's been at the core of our whole competitive strategy. Nothing more complicated. If you go all the way back, you start by saying that it begins by making a difference in communities across America. I walk into these cafes and I walk up to people and I say to them, "Why are you here?" And they say, "Well, my Bible study group is meeting here, or my study group is meeting here, or I'm meeting a couple of other housewives wanted to get out of the house. And the part of Panera that I feel the most proud of is when we become the community centers for people, and particularly in communities in which there is no center. And that's a wonderful feeling for us. What else fuels Panera? Engaging environments. If we're going to create community, the environment itself is at the core. And the environment has got to create the kind of experience that people want to be a part of. What else? The people themselves are very much a part of it. The associates themselves, if they don't bring self-respect to their work, if they don't have that work, if they're simply extensions of the cash register, the whole thing falls apart. And that's been core to where we've been for many, many years. And what else? The very core of this meeting, food you respect. Because unfortunately, way too often in our industry, it's food you don't respect. And what we're talking about with Panera, what we've been talking about for 20 years, going back now 30 years in our predecessor company, Old Bon Pain, was food that you really wanted to eat, that you felt good about eating, you felt a sense of pride in eating, and that actually elevated you in your self-esteem. That's what we were talking about. Let me share with you something else. For us, in our formative years, that started as artisan bread. That started as bread that was made without chemicals, without preservatives, on stone deck ovens, the way it had been made generations before. That was the forerunner of what this company was about. For us, that began to extend into soups. And I'd say 15 and 20 years ago, when we were first doing soups and nobody was eating, shall I say, soups in mass-scale restaurants, for us, bringing soups to America was a big deal. It took form in terms of sandwiches, and sandwiches that were more than just a hamburger. We're talking about things like smoked turkey and boursin, roast beef and brie. We're talking about a range of different things that in a world in which people were becoming elevated in terms of their interest in food and their desire was beginning to offer that. And I think the biggest thing for us in the last 15 years was the advent of salads. And I can remember when we began to put salads on the menu, there weren't salads in America. Literally in most communities around this country, there were not salads in most establishment restaurants other than as a starter with the main meal. And for us, salads became an important entree and a very, very, very large part of our business. Where did that take us? Where did that lead us? It led us somewhere very specifically to this conversation today. Essentially, Panera and our work has been to be on a journey to offer a better-for-you food now for almost 2 decades. What's been at the core of that success, what's been at the core of making a difference in these communities, what's been at the core of making a difference in people's lives, is actually food that people want to eat, that they feel good about eating, and that actually elevates them. And we call that better-for-you food. So let me share with you where it took us over essentially the last decade. 11 years ago, we went in search of antibiotic-free chicken. And I want to share with you something. When we began that search, we were really looking for real chicken. We were sitting around, and most of the chicken that was in the supply system was what I call processed chicken. You know, it was the kind of chicken you ate it, and you knew something was wrong with it. It didn't feel like real chicken. It didn't feel like the kind of chicken we got at home. And we began inside Panera saying, how do we find real chicken? And we went to a number of suppliers, and we began to find that some of the very best chicken was what we'd call antibiotic-free chicken. It was chicken raised without antibiotics. And we began to learn about it. We began to learn the impact of these antibiotics on the public health system, and we began to recognize this was something we wanted to do. And for us, we began to realize that what we wanted to serve is what we called it back then spa chickens. These were chickens that essentially were raised with all the benefits of being at a spa. You know, lots of room to run around, lots of good food to eat, and essentially raised without the chemicals to pump them up. And this was the core for us. And we began to think about this. And we began to say, do we really want to introduce chicken raised without antibiotics? And at that time, I'll share with you the reaction. People said we were crazy. Our own internal people said we were crazy. Our board thought we were crazy. Why would we want to do this? The reality is back then, chicken raised without antibiotics was costing $2, $3, $4 a pound more. You say, why would you do that? It's not good for your business. And I think we said, it's good for our customer. It's good for our public health system. It's something we want to take a shot at doing. And we did it. And here was the reality. The reality was, initially, they were right. It was more money. It was more difficult. It put a lot of pressure on us. But here's what we found. The guests supported our ABF chicken initiative with their wallets. Almost immediately, our sales began to take off in these salads made with this chicken. And people began to write us, and they began to talk to us about the impact of this chicken. And we were very, very moved by the response we began to get. And then we began to see something else. We began to see others in our industry began to adopt antibiotic-free chicken. And we began to see some of the smaller players at that point begin to adopt it. But we began to see it. And here's what we saw happen at that point. We began to see success bred these followers. And what happened when you had success and a whole range of different people beginning to use that chicken? Here's what you saw. You began to see those costs come down. You began to see those costs that had one time been $3 to $4 a pound begin to descend from $3 a pound to $2 a pound. The supply system began to catch up. And they began to say, hey, there was money to be made here. This is something worth doing. We want to produce antibiotic-free chicken. Here's the interesting part of the whole story. We're now 11 years later. The largest companies in the industry have come to realize ABF chicken is the ante. Chick-fil-A announced they were going to go to antibiotic-free chicken in the next couple of years. McDonald's sort of announced they were going to antibiotic-free chicken, not fully antibiotic-free, but antibiotics that essentially don't affect humans. All right, so they took their version of it. You now have Purdue and Tyson that are announcing initiatives relative to antibiotic-free chicken. What's the point here? The point is, and this is really the key, the degree to which our system is responding and reacting to initiatives that people begin to take. And that's the power of what we saw with antibiotic-free chicken. Let me share with you something else. As we became more exposed to it, I think you, Dr. Willett, were one of the folks that we began to read about. We met with you in Boston. We began to learn. And I think we all began, many of us, who had grown up in this industry and loved it and loved making a difference in people's lives, we began to understand the degree to which our food system itself was not fully serving us. Some might argue, I would, that we have a broken food system that actually is under-delivering for us. But however you cut it, you know the food system itself is under-delivering for us. Here's the reality, if you think about the food system. 1 in 4 American children, 1 in 4 are living in households without enough food. 1 in 4 were in some home in the last year where they didn't have enough to eat. Just think about that. That's America. This isn't some foreign country. That's right here. Is that a food system working for us? Let me talk about something else, and I know you all know this. America is unquestionably getting sicker. Right? This is obesity rates, essentially over the last 20 years. And our obesity rates are up essentially nearly double. Right? We're going the wrong way, folks. We're not going the right way. And talk about diabetes, which is at the core of so much. Our diabetes rates have more than doubled over the last 20 years. Is that a food system that's working? That's a food system that's got challenges, serious challenges. And let me share with you something else, and I think you know it, but it's the reality. For the first time in our history, our children are expected to live shorter lives than us. Think about that. Right? Is that a system that's working? Shorter lives than us. And let me say something. These are statistics, these are numbers we've seen up on the board, but the reality is, as a parent of 2, I'm humbled by those statistics. I feel it very personally. You know, many people recognize our heavily processed standard diet. Standard American diet is part of the problem, maybe at the core of the problem. So how do we think about that? Let me share with you something else. Consumers today, it's getting worse. Consumers find themselves overwhelmed with information and increasingly conflicted about what they should eat versus what they want to eat. We walk around in a world where people know they should be doing better, but they're often unsure about what to do. And why is it? Because there's so much information, and this has become fodder for the media, and it's become almost like cable TV, where we're more interested in the argument than what we share common knowledge about. And you look at the publications, you look at the food sections in the paper, you look at the health news coming out, and is it any wonder, way too often, our consumers are seeing food as a negative, not a positive. They're in that kind of context. It's a challenging environment. Here's my point. No one can deny that we're at a point in time when our relationship with food needs to be addressed. It's at the very core of what this conference is about. It's the very core of what a lot of us think about often. Let me say something else. As a leader of an organization that feeds 10 million Americans every week, as I said, 3% of every American, I want Panera to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. It's very personal. Let me say something else. Right? That understanding that our food system has real challenges, that understanding that our consumers are confused, that understanding and our success with ABF Chicken, how we saw it change in the marketplace, re-energized, how you saw the prices change, frankly, it energized us. It energized us to take on other initiatives. So for us, we've been expanding the range of ABF proteins within Panera. For us today, we are offering ABF-free, or antibiotic-free roasted turkey. No antibiotics ever. We're offering antibiotic-free ham. We're offering antibiotic-free breakfast sausage. And our bacon is antibiotic-free. Right? It's become part of it. And pieces of success led to other success. It gave us the permission to take those risks. In 2007, we took the next risk. We talked about it today, but we voluntarily removed non-naturally occurring trans fats from our food. Said we're going to take it off the menu. As you heard from Dr. Willett, the food industry as of today, the announcement came out, must within the next 3 years comply with a new federal ban on trans fats. We have made progress. People have taken a step. You all have pushed for it, and we've ultimately seen these kind of changes take effect across the marketplace. Let me share with you something else. In 2010, there was a huge controversy in the restaurant industry. The issue was posting caloric information. Should we post it? And so many in our industry fought it. And I must tell you, in our offices, we thought it was crazy. We're in the business of making a difference in customers' lives. We're in the business of building trust. Why do we want to hide the information? It seems to me if we're embarrassed about what we're serving, change what you serve. Don't hide it. Doesn't it seem to make sense? And that was the very core of our understanding. What's amazing to us is now, literally 5 years later, we've had it up for 5 years. Now, December 1st of 2015, all restaurant operators with 20 or more locations will be required to post caloric information. I mean, change comes. People take a step, others follow, and change comes. In 2010, understanding the issues with food insecurity, we developed something called Panera Cares. Some of you may know about it. What these are community cafes. They're essentially a Panera with no set price. And here's the amazing thing. People thought we were nuts in doing it. The reality is today, we have 4 of these Panera Cares open, and we'll feed upwards of 1 million people through them. And again, it's an experiment. It's not going to change the world, but it's a step in the right place. And it's a step, in my view, saying that most people are fundamentally good. Left to their own devices, in a donation bin, they will do the right thing. It's been a powerful thing for us. Something else important happened along the way for us. And this is where we want to push it forward. And this is the Panera journey. Fixing our food system and the challenges of our food system became personal, very personal. Became very personal to me. You know, I'm a bit older than most of you. And my mother died of a heart attack 20-odd years ago. And I remember after she died, I went to see a cardiologist. I wanted to make sure it wasn't going to happen to me. And at that time, the prevailing wisdom was essentially go low fat. And I went low fat. And I became what I call a pastavarian. I ate a ton of pasta. You know, that was the way I avoided, I thought, the wrong kinds of things, and it allowed me to eat the right kinds of things. And each year, I try to sit down and figure out where am I going with my life, in relation to my business, my family, my God, the things that I care about. Where am I headed? And one of the things I began to realize in my 50s was my relationship with food was wrong. The prevailing understandings had gone in a very different way than I was eating. And I began to say and understand, as you all do, a calorie is not a calorie. And that there are indeed better proteins and worse proteins, better fats and worse fats, and indeed, in my own home, better carbs and worse carbs. And I began to change my own diet. And what I began to find is not only did I lose 20-odd pounds, not because I intended to, but because it worked for me in terms of the way I was eating, but I began to feel better. And it began to translate into the way I related to my business and the way I related to people around me. And I became a supporter of it. Let me share with you something else, and it's maybe the most important piece of it for me. My children, and these are my children, it's my son Michael, 16, taller than me, my daughter Emma, 12. My children are in a Panera 5 to 10 days a week, 5 to 10 times a week. They're there 5 to 10 times a week. They're eating this food. And here's the question, and it's the question I challenge you with. And my question is to everyone in our industry. Do we not want to feed our guests the same food we want for ourselves and for our children? It's that simple. If you turn it down to that question, the answers become very evident. I have this view. We talk about being profit-making ventures. There's no ability to make profit if we don't make a contribution first. If we're simply extracting, we're ultimately going to become extinct. And the reality is, if we used as a judgment, as a criteria, our own families and our own selves, it will take us to the right places. So let me share with you where it took us. In 2014, we formalized a food policy that had been at the core of the way we had been thinking for the prior 10 years. And we decided that if we were going to do it, we had to commit to it. Now, we've been working on a lot of these things for many years. But we said, we're going to go out and we're going to say something. And we shared publicly what we've always believed is food as it should be. And what we shared was our commitment to food that should be clean. And we're going to talk about that in a second. What else did we share? Our belief that menus should be transparent with real nutritional options. Not false nutritional options where there really is no choice, but real choices. And then finally, we believe that, well, there is no final. So those were the two principles we had. All right, as these slides get written. Okay, so where did it take us? There is a third principle. Sorry, the clicker's off. And the third principle, food should be good and good for you. And it's very simple. We want food that you really want to eat, and that in eating is food that actually is healthy for you. We want to be in alignment. So where did that take us? Last month, we began to operationalize it. And we shared the changes we were making to ensure guests would receive what we call clean food at Panera. What we announced was a list of 157 ingredients that will be removed, that will not be found in our Panera menu, that will not be found in our food. And that was what we called our no-no list. And clean food at Panera begins with this no-no list. Let me give some sense of what it is. It starts with no artificial colors. It follows with no artificial flavors. From there, we go to no artificial preservatives. And then we talk about no artificial sweeteners. That, to us, is our no-no list of what we want to make sure is off the menu. So how does it take form for Panera? What does it mean? All right, let me begin to share with you where we got it. Because here's the reality. Like most food service people, we know something about making food. We're not scientists. And I'm often in these encounters where people say, did you know that ingredient doesn't cause harm? And what's wrong with you for saying that? Or, do you know this ingredient is going to cause cancer in about 20 minutes? And I can't engage in that debate. I'm not capable of engaging in that debate. So here's what I do know. We went to people we respect, and we said, talk to us. We looked at the EU standards. We began to talk to the National Resources Defense Council. They have a view of it, and they have some clarity on what we don't want on our menus. We went to the Environmental Working Group. We looked at their list of what you want to take out of your menus. We went to the Union of Concerned Scientists. We looked at their lists. We began to think about what it is that we don't want on our menu. And again, we didn't try to do the science, because that isn't our business. We looked to the scientists to guide us, and we looked to a reasonable standard. So why is a no-no list a positive addition? How do we think about that? Let me begin and say it's a transparent, it's an attempt to put in place a transparent, so everybody can see it, a comprehensive line in the sand. It's a commitment that you can trust the food you eat at Panera. I like to think of it like a good housekeeping seal of approval. You know, what I like to think about when I go to Panera with my kids is I'm getting the same quality food my wife is making at home. Right? That's essentially what we're trying to do here. And we're trying to say you can get the same food at Panera that you're going to have at home. What else? It's essentially our promise to our consumers, that you can be confident in your choice at Panera. Because unfortunately, way too many consumers today lack confidence. They lack clarity. And the reality is, for our consumer, we don't want them to have to bring a scientist with them when they go to have dinner. They don't need Walter Willett when they go to dinner. And they absolutely don't need a dictionary to translate what it is they're eating and to understand its scientific implications. So is it perfect? No. But is it an attempt to draw a line in the sand so that people can understand? Yes. Right? Here's our view on it. Most reasonable observers would agree, and that's all it is. Not everybody, but most reasonable observers would agree. Simple and less processed foods are better. That's it. We're trying to give you food that's simpler and less processed. What else? A pantry as close to the one you have at home is a good thing. The restaurant industry is under assault. Supermarkets are growing. Restaurant industries, I believe, for the first time in 25 years, are beginning to shrink. Right? Our pantry in our restaurants need to be as clean and good as the pantry you have at home. And then third, very personally, clean tastes better. I remember when we were working on all this, and Dan Kish, one of the former deans here at the CIA, heads food development for us. And he said to me, Ron, we've been working on this for years. We got to have you out here to taste it. And we flew down to Birmingham, Alabama. It was about 8 o'clock at night. It was a group of us. And he said, I want to prepare you, Ron. It's going to be clean, but it's not going to taste any different. And he was setting me up. I knew it. And we began to eat some of these salads with the clean dressings. And I looked at him and said, Dan, you got it wrong. Just taste this. Clean tastes better. And the reality is it does taste better. It has a different mouthfeel. It has a different way that I relate to it. It just tasted better to me. And I ultimately believe if we're only about taste, clean tastes better. If we're about health, it certainly can't hurt us to have a simpler, less processed menu. And that's really what this no list is about. All right, let me tell you something else. All right? And here is really the part that I find the most interesting. As soon as we announced our no list, which we announced, I think, 4 or 6 weeks ago, many others in the industry followed us. It tells you something about progress, right? Within 2 days, Noodling Company, right, they announced they were going to have a no list. They were going to remove all artificial ingredients from their menus. We said, that's interesting. You know, the day after that, Taco Bell announced it. I'm still trying to figure out how they're going to take the radioactive yellow out of the taco shells. But don't say anything, and please don't quote me on that, right? But the point, I'm sorry, it's a joke. I'm sure it's not radioactive, right? But it is a question, right? You know, and it is a serious question. The next day was Pizza Hut who announced they were pulling out artificial ingredients. And after that, Papa John's did. Right? And they said their claim to fame is they already had 57 of the ingredients on the Panera list. They said it in their press release and in their advertising that they already had 57 of the ingredients that Panera had on its 157-item list. They had it out. So we now had a reference point. And then we saw Subway just a couple of days ago announce they were going to remove all artificial ingredients or some form of it because everybody has their own definition of it. What are we seeing? We're seeing change more rapidly than we've ever seen before. So here's my point. Where does this journey take Panera in the future? Where do we go? What do we do next? Because the point I want to share with you, and I don't know about it for you, but for me, it's been a 20-year journey. I had no clue where we were ending up. We just started out to make a difference in people's lives, then to make a difference in people's lives through food, and then to begin to make a difference in people's lives through their health, and always trying to do it with integrity, and always trying to do it in a way in which we respect it, and always using as our criterion, our standard, how would we want to eat ourselves, and how would we want to feed our kids. So we believe the consumer will continue to evolve, and will reward those in the industry who offer food that is both good and good for you. It's clear the trends are happening. You see venture capital moving against it. More importantly, you see the consumer moving against it. If you look at the data that I see, you see your millennial customers, your younger customers, and you see your women actually over-indexing on a number of these factors. This is where the future is. Our challenge in business, our challenge in our industry, is to figure out where the future is going and to be there. Be there before the future arrives. That's our challenge as business leaders and as food leaders, and I'm telling you where the world is going. And I know you'll see the research that says that. For us, that means Panera will continue to roll out new products with an eye towards nutrition. It's very important to us. Let me share with you something else. We believe Panera, with our last name bread, must lead the good bread movement in America. As Dr. Willett said, Right up on the list of the dietary guidelines is whole grains. Right? And you will see from us, all of our flatbreads will feature 15 grams of whole grains. Right? We're going to move in that direction. We've got to. It's our obligation and it's our responsibility. And third, we believe our guests deserve real dietary options, and we believe that technology can help us to offer that to them. We hope to be in a position using our technology to actually offer curated menus. You know, it's very interesting. I eat close to a vegetarian diet. I have friends that work with me who eat closer to a paleo diet, high protein, right? Why are we seeing the same menu? Why can't I receive a menu, my breakfast sandwich, shall we say, with spinach or kale? And why can't his have ham on it? In reality, we can begin to think of the menu not as those 100 items on the menu board, because our kitchens have the capability of making thousands of things, but we can begin to serve up menus that are unique and individual to each of you. And if you have that information, and we do, we have information on what about 50% of our customers are eating, 19 million Americans. We're able to actually uniquely develop and serve up menus to them in ways in which they want. You know, for us, there's been much learning on this journey. And that's really my message of today. And I want to share with you what we learned. This is what we've learned. Let me start and say this. If you can generate demand, if you can, leading edge retailers will evolve to meet that demand. It's the way it works in the marketplace. It's that simple. Let me share with you something else. As the marketplace evolves, the economics will change, just as they did with all of the products we have served. And this, in turn, will attract more retailers and broaden adoption. What else? This is my point. The marketplace itself may very well be the best means, the singular best means to affect change. We live in a world where regulation is challenged all the time, on a political level. Whether you agree or disagree with regulation, and I do personally, but having said that, whether you agree with it or you don't, the marketplace itself may be the most powerful way to affect change. All right? And so here's my point. Right? Celebrate and patronize those retailers that seek to be part of the solution. Ultimately, the marketplace will respond, and you will have helped to bring about the change you desire. What else? Celebrate food and the joy of food. We've got to get out of this negative view with food. It's about what you should be eating. It's not about what you shouldn't be eating. And indeed, it's about food as part of a positive lifestyle, not as something to be avoided and feel threatened by. And lastly, and maybe the most important, and it is personal, keep it personal, because it is. It's about our health, our individual health. It's about our children's health, and it's about the health of our country. Let me end with this. All I would simply say to you is if you want change, be change, demand change, the marketplace will change. Thank you.
Inspiring, Ron. Thank you so much. Good luck with your new initiatives, and we will follow your progress very, very closely. Very exciting. Now, as we like to do at the CIA, we love to go over these issues. We love to look ahead. We love to debate and discuss. At the end of the day, it comes down to what are we cooking, what are we tasting, and so we're going to close with our culinary keynote, and it's really a pleasure and a privilege to have Franklin Becker with us, chef owner of Little Beet, to lead us through a discussion and presentation designing next generation seductive food experiences. Franklin is executive chef of the Little Beet and the Little Beet Table, and chef and partner of Hungry Root. He has made preparing wholesome and healthy food a focal point of his life. At the age of 27, Franklin was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Rather than despair, he transformed his cooking style and learned to use simple ingredients to create dazzling dishes that are healthful and flavorful. Born in Brooklyn, Franklin has had the opportunity to work in some of the country's best kitchens, including the EMM Group, Patina, Star Restaurants, Mesa Grill. In 2013, he competed in Bravo's Top Chef Masters. He is the author of 3 cookbooks, Eat and Beat Diabetes, The Diabetic Chef, and most recently, Good Fat Cooking. Franklin is a 1993 graduate of the CIA, and it's a great pleasure to welcome him to the stage. Franklin Becker.
Thank you very much. How's everybody doing? Ready to wake up a little bit? Have some fun? All right, so let me get past this slide. We already know about this. So Little Beat and Little Beat Table are 2 restaurants that I own. It's part of Orify Brands, which is our parent company. We own the Melt Shop. We actually own all the Five Guys burger shops in Brooklyn and Manhattan as a franchisee. We own another original concept called Field's Good Chicken. Little Beat was created because we wanted to change the way America eats. As a type 2 diabetic, and I was diagnosed back in 1997, I started to change the way I ate and lost a lot of weight, dropped about 40 pounds, because when I was up here, I just ate everything in sight, I promise you. And I wanted to change the way, I didn't want to be insulin dependent. I didn't want to have a situation where I was reliant on drugs. I wanted to change through diet, through the way I did things. So Little Beat is, fast forward now 20 years, Little Beat is or almost 20 years, Little Beat is something that I really believe in. I believe in the core values of Little Beat because I believe our wheat sources here in the United States are polluted. I'm sorry to Ron, who owns a bread concept, but I really believe that our sources are polluted, and I really wanted to make a change. So I created Little Beat and demanded that it be gluten-free. As I was doing it, my girlfriend has celiac. My eldest son has autism and has gluten issues. So I felt like I was going to make an impact on society by making that change. So that's what I did. I wrote Good Fat Cooking because I firmly believe that as Americans, we eat too many saturated fats, and we need to start looking at the healthy fat options: avocado, fats from fish, nuts, as the doctor was saying, olive oil, olives. Those are things that are really essential for us. They make our systems function better. Hungry Root is a new internet-based business that is spiralizing noodles. I'm basically spiralizing vegetables and turning them into pasta, and then creating different sauces that go along with it. So if you want to try it, just put in menus of change. And what's today's date? 6/17. Give me about 24 hours to get that programmed. Anything east of the Mississippi, I'll give you $20 off. Okay, so you can try it and you can see how it is. It is a subscription service. They're $10 meals, and we're planning on obviously blowing that out. So getting to the next slide, the truth about our food. I believe Ron spoke about this, and he's 100% on mark. You have to be true to who you are and true to what you serve in this business. You cannot play games. Everything is about truth. For us, it's delicious, nutritious, simple yet innovative food served by pleasant and friendly staff in a quick service industry. That's what we do. We do that to the tune of about 1,200 to 1,500 people a day at our 50th Street location in Manhattan, and we have 10 more units opening up this year with 2 more Little Beat tables opening up. And we believe in the phrase guilt-free, okay? Playing off of gluten-free, guilt-free. We want the food to be fresh. We want it to be guilt-free. We want you to just not have to worry about what you're eating. No matter what you get when you walk into Little Beat, you know that you're getting something good and something that's fast and farm fresh. So that's our credo. This is an example of some of the food at Little Beat Table. My crudité up top, my beet salad, and a kale salad with avocado, pecans, and orange segments, which is actually at Little Beat. So how does this impact business? Because ultimately we're all here for how it impacts business, right? And who our customers are and what they write about things. So we have just a little snap of what they're saying. And this person down here is a head coach in training. They follow Healthier Eats in the kitchen and dining out. Wellness Simplified in New York City. This one's a home skin person, a home skincare person. This one's a cancer survivor. This is the face of our clientele. This is who our clientele is. It's you, okay? It's everybody sitting here in this audience. It's a microcosm of what we're dealing with in New York City. What our customers stand for. They're high fashion, they're aspirational, they're elegant, they're concerned with beauty and upkeep, they're determined. Fitness, they're a little crazy, off the beaten path, they're fun, they're natural, they're together, they're into yoga, outdoors, juicing, escape. These are all the things. So we, have a juicing section where we juice everything through a machine called the X1, which is a cold press machine that extracts the maximum amount of nutrients. And everything we do daily. So every day we're starting fresh. Never are we in the situation where we're carrying over from the day before, other than maybe some simple knife cuts. Okay? Our demographic breakdown, and now this is really amazing, because we're 64% female, 36% male. That's actually changing a little bit now, and we're getting more and more males coming in. In Little Beat Table, we're about 85% female. That's a good thing, because wherever there's females, there's males chasing afterwards. Okay? It's just the way it is. Okay? You go out in the wilds of Africa, you see a female lion, guarantee there's a male sitting there waiting for that female lion. Anyway, whatever. So most of our guests are between 20 and 30 years old. We are in the central business district of Manhattan. We're on 50th between 6th and 7th. So being that centralized, a lot of our people are very affluent and a lot of young entrepreneurs. It's 73.8% Caucasian, 12% Asian, 6.4 Hispanic, 2.1 African American. Now this speaks to society in general as who's eating healthy, right? The inner cities don't have the offerings that major metropolitan cities have, or the wealthier areas tend to have better food selections. We need to change that. We need to start hitting the inner cities. We need to hit, what Ron's doing. Ron, where are you, Ron? Panera? Oh, okay. I applaud you so much because you are a person who can change this industry a lot quicker than I can, okay? Because, thank you very much. But you can change it quicker, and I'll tell you why. Because you have so many more stores than I do that you can turn around and you can say, listen, you can't raise these chickens this way. You can't raise the beef this way. You can't put GMOs and antibiotics and hormones into the food. You can't do it, okay? And if you turn around and say that, and then somebody else big turns around and says that, people have to listen, okay? They have to listen, and that's what we're doing. We're trying to affect change, and we have to affect change in the inner cities too, because kids, they're 5 years old, and they're getting a type 2 adult onset diabetes at 5 years old diagnosed. When I was diagnosed, I was 27. Very, very early to be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Now, 5 years old. That's a major problem. The amount of autism, the amount of celiac, the amount of cancer, everything that's happening in this country today, we have to make the change, and we have the power and the ability to do so. So I've always wondered what's up with gluten-free. Gluten-free doesn't mean healthier. I just want to get that out of the way. Oftentimes, it actually means less healthy, okay? Except if you do it the way I do it. Being truthful. Gluten-free, they'll put fillers, they'll put different things into the breads or to make it taste good or make it feel like bread. It doesn't have fiber. But I don't serve sandwiches. You know what? I don't need them. I serve a protein, it's naturally gluten-free. I serve vegetables, they're naturally gluten-free. I serve legumes, they're naturally gluten-free. Most of what we eat is naturally gluten-free. So that's what I concentrate my business on. I'm not looking to compete in the sandwich category because guess what? Gluten-free bread stinks. Okay? Very few companies out there actually create a good product. There are a couple, and if you want to invest in them, I'll tell you, Free Bread has an amazing product. And they're small, and there are a lot of mom and pops. And they can't get the backing because people think it doesn't taste so great. And they're right. It really doesn't. But if you get a product that you can stand by, and I make a gluten-free flatbread at Little B Table, you'll swear you're eating a regular piece of pizza. Okay? Thomas Keller created a great flour called Cup for Cup. And it revolutionized, in a lot of ways, the way gluten-free bread eats. Okay? But it still does have a lot of xanthan gum, okay, which is GMO corn-derived most of the time. I use non-GMO xanthan gum, but still, it is corn-based, derived from a lot of GMO products. Antioxidants, very important. I don't need to go over the medical aspects of things. I just wanted to show this slide because this is what the basis of Little Beet is about. It's about getting as much fiber into your diet because it fills you up. We do that through essential phytonutrients in vegetables. We get that into your diet. Antioxidants, they're powerful compounds that we need in our bodies. Free radicals. Olive oil is the only oil we use, with the exception of very little, actually, I think very little expeller pressed safflower oil right now. But in general, 95% of our oil is olive oil that we use. And we're protein-based. Come in, order a chicken, order a steak, order a vegetable patty that I make with lentils and quinoa and chickpeas, or order a piece of salmon, and then pair it up with vegetables that are roasted or grilled, or salads that are all prepared, or pair it up with a leafy green salad, and that's it. Be on your way. From the time you walk into the restaurant, at the door, which is about 100 feet away from the queue, from the start of the queue, to get in and out of my restaurant, it takes between 7 and 8 minutes. Okay? So if you're a customer, you turn around, you're 100 some odd feet away, you get to the register, you place your order, a minute later, you have your order. Okay? And it's all prepared constantly throughout the day, so there's cooks behind, constantly replenishing the line, so it never falls behind. We're SPE certified. It's a certification that just basically says that we're health-based, health-oriented, concentrating on the best food possible, and they give a certification 1, 2, or 3 stars, 3 being the highest. We're 3. We are completely transparent about everything. So if you order roasted sweet potatoes, and this is in our allergen information, we post it, we give it out as handouts, it's on our website. If you order the sweet potatoes, you're getting 280 calories, you're getting 16 grams of fat, but it's coming from olive oil, so it's unsaturated, healthy fat, good fat. There's 9 grams of sugars that are coming from the actual sweet potato itself, 5 grams of fiber, 6 grams of protein, 240 sodium, it's coming from some sea salt, and there's 31 grams of carbs, and it goes on and on. So people know exactly what they're eating, and they feel good about that. Okay, it's truth in menu, transparency, very, very important. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with FARE. I do serve a lot of nuts, and I do believe in nuts, but FARE in general is about food allergies and what's happening. Seafood, nuts, all the really dangerous allergies that kill people, the anaphylactic allergies. That's what FARE concentrates on. 4% of the U.S. population is affected by one of those major allergens. 4%. That's an increase of 50% from 97 to 2011. That's a huge, massive increase. Why? Okay, why? Because our food sources are not clean, and we need to make sure that they get clean. Celiac disease, 1% of the U.S. population right now, 4 times more common now than 50 years ago. Okay? Keeps on growing. Keeps on growing. I don't know why it says 1 million people. It's a lot more than 1 million people. I believe there's 280 million people in the United States right now. So that would be 2.8 million, right, at that point. Type 2 diabetes. 26% in youths 19 and under. Previously unheard of for children to develop, formerly called adult onset diabetes, now 5 years old. Okay? Very, very, very scary. And it all comes down to our food sources. And it comes down to exactly what the doctor was talking about, exactly what Ron was talking about. It's about our food sources, and we have to make sure that they're clean. Ocean and soil. We're feeding our children improper diets. That's what I meant about inner city and how we need to talk about getting it into the inner cities. We need to change the way our kids eat. We need to stop polluting the earth at its core, and we're weakening our immune system. Genetically engineered food, it's made its way into many facets of our food system. It's the responsibility of farmers, chefs like myself, and the consumer to demand food grown properly. And we need to take responsibility. With whatever we're doing, we need to take responsibility. We guarantee no cross-contamination. Okay, we go right to our sources. If our sources make their food in a mixed area, we don't want them as a supplier. We will not deal with that. We've thrown out suppliers who changed their practices, even though it was our #1 selling item. We used to run a salad with millet, puffed millet. In America, we eat it. It's bird food in America. In Africa, it's the main grain of sustenance, right, in Western Africa. So we took puffed millet and we mixed it with pico de gallo, or tomatoes and cilantro and onions, and we mixed it with some avocado, hence guacamole, right? And we created this salad that was amazing. It was delicious. It was our #1 seller with our lowest food cost. It was about an 8% food cost. And the company we were getting it from changed their practices because they wanted to value engineer the way they ran their business, and they started milling wheat in the same mill, in the same popper. And I turned around and I picked up the phone and I called them and I said, why? And they explained to me economic reasons, and I said, okay, great. And I hung up. I said, you're not going to go back? And they said, no. And I was going through 51 cases a month of this millet at one store. I said, listen, I'm opening up 10 more stores. This is what I'm going through. You sure you're not going to change it? No, we're not going to change it. Okay, boop, right off my menu. Okay, just like that. I'm not going to serve something that's going to risk my guests. You've got to be true to your values, and you have to stick to them no matter what. Okay? And if you can't afford to serve something because it's out of your price range, then don't serve it. But don't scale back. Don't cheapen your values for an economic gain. It just doesn't make any sense. People will come and people will trust you. We are the people that can make a difference in society. The chefs, the businessmen, people in this room, the writers, we are the people who can affect that change, and we need to do that. So we trust our purveyors. Some of our purveyors, Baldor Specialty Foods, Anson Mills, Bell & Evans, Creekstone Farms, we trust them. Okay, and we have a relationship with them. This is what I already talked about. And now on to the fun thing. So one of my favorite things in the world is a Caesar salad. But it's unhealthy, okay? It's eggs, and it's oil, and it's cheese, and it's not necessarily the lightest or heart-healthiest thing to eat. But I love the flavor of it. So what I did was, I said, how can I create the creaminess of a Caesar dressing, but nutritiously? So I took chickpeas, okay, because I was eating some hummus with some vegetables, and I took chickpeas, and I said, all right, I'm going to use this as a base to ultimately add body and create my dressing. And I threw them in a blender because, listen, this blender, by the way, the Vitamix, the VitaPrep, is the best blender on the planet. Okay, sorry, if anybody from Vitamix is, I accept money for these plugs. So I added some chickpeas to the blender. To that, I said to myself, okay, what are the other elements that go into a Caesar dressing? So I have some mustard. I have some spice, and I just use a little sriracha, okay, which is just a chili that's been fermented and then pureed. Nothing to it. I add some garlic, which I've roasted. Okay, which I've roasted. I add some vinegar. Kind of give it that zip. I add some lemon juice. And then, cheapest ingredient on the planet, water. Okay, and that's to make sure that the blender catches it. This is going to make a little noise. Sorry about that. And I just blend that up into a smooth puree. And I'm going to let it go for a minute or so. Good fat, extra virgin olive oil. With a cap that won't come off. And I'm just emulsifying in. Okay, I'll adjust the seasoning, a little salt, a little pepper. I have to taste it though because I have no idea where it is right now, right? And it kind of tastes like a Caesar dressing right now. A little black pepper. And I'm going to add just a touch more water. One last blend. Now in the restaurant, I do this a little bit more upscale, the way I'm going to do it here for today. In the fast casual, I serve this with romaine, chickpeas, some pumpkin seeds, okay, and that's the garnish. So I'm getting the crunch of the croutons from the chickpeas and the pumpkin seeds, and then I'm getting the Caesar-esque effect from the romaine, right? Chickpea dressing. What I'm going to do here, and what I do at Little B Table, is I take some snow peas or snap peas, and I have both here, and I mix them with some raw carrots, okay, and then I add a touch of mint, some chives, some parsley, and a few of those. Actually, I'm not going to add the chickpeas. I'm going to add a little bit of chili. And that's just to kick up that spice because I really like when things are zippy. Okay? I don't like when things are bland or flat. I'm just going to taste that dressing. Right on point. My salt, right here. Just a little touch of salt to season that. Mix that up. I'm going to add my chickpea dressing. Toss that right up in the bowl to just coat. Who wants to eat this, by the way? Everybody wants to eat this? Yeah. Exactly, and that's the point. It's like making food that people want to eat, okay? Not food that people want to run away from. And I think that's how we can affect change. How we can really make a difference is by serving food that people want to eat. So I have this. I'm just going to put a little bit more of that creamy dressing down and in around the bottle, the bowl. Turn around. Plate this. And knowing that we always want some Parmesan cheese on our Caesar salad, by using a microplane, I can make it look like there's tons of Parmesan cheese on there, but I'm really not grating a lot at all. And I'm covering more of a surface area, so I'm getting a lot more flavor. Little fresh cracked black pepper, and there you have it. That's my Caesar salad. Okay, snap peas, chickpea dressing, as simple as that. Okay? Thank you. Any questions at all? Any questions at all? All good? Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Franklin. Thanks, Franklin. Delicious way to end the afternoon, and a great segue to our plant-forward burger bash out on the Beverage Garden Plaza. We have a wonderful, warm June evening here in the Hudson Valley. Just a couple of notes about the morning. Breakfast will be downstairs at 7:45. Start time at 8:15 in here, and we also have some book signings during the reception with Dr. Willett, Will Rosenzweig, and Franklin Becker. Enjoy the evening, and we'll see you in the morning. Thank you.